Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the GALA webinar series. My name is Manuela Noske, and I'm the Communications Manager here at GALA. GALA is a global non-profit trade association supporting the language industry. We are headquartered in Seattle, Washington in the United States, and today we're going to have a presentation by Katharine Allen and Barry Slaughter Olsen from Interpret America. And we're so pleased each of you joined us from various locations all around the world to participate in this event. I will hand it over to our speakers in just one moment, but first I have a few housekeeping items to go over. We have muted everyone's lines to cut down on any background noise. If you experience any technical difficulties, you can let me know by using your chat box, and I will work with you to troubleshoot them. If you have a slow internet connection, your audio may be disrupted. If that happens, you can use the number listed on the GoToWebinar panel to call in using your own phone. We are making a recording of this presentation, and you will be able to find it following the presentation on GALA's global website. All participants will receive a link. The hosts will answer your questions at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to type them into your chat box throughout the webinar to get them into the queue. We will get to as many questions as we can with the time remaining at the end of the session. Before we begin, I'd like to take just a few moments to introduce our speakers. Katharine Allen is co-president of Interpret America, an organization that is dedicated to raising the profile of the interpreting industry, which hosts the annual Interpret America Summit. She trains interpreters and interpreter trainers, provides curriculum design and language access consulting to hospitals. Clients have included Kaiser Permanente, the Department of Defense, Glendon College of Translation, and the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. Katharine holds a master's in translation and interpretation from MIIS. Barry Slaughter Olsen is a veteran conference interpreter and technophile with over 2 decades of experience interpreting, training interpreters, and organizing language services. He's an associate professor at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, the founder and co-president of Interpret America, and general manager of multilingual operations at ZipDX. And so now, without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Katharine and Barry for the remainder of the session. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Manuela. Hi, this is Barry, and Katharine is here with me. We just wanted to let you know that Katharine is in California in the Sierra Nevada, and they had about 2 feet of snow dumped on them last night. So her internet may be a little bit spotty. We're going to hope that it holds out throughout the presentation, but if it doesn't, you'll know why, and I will jump in for her on the parts that she's unable to cover because of the internet. We're hoping that that's not going to be an issue, but we wanted to flag it for you as we begin. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to be talking about artificial intelligence in the interpreting market. One thing you should understand about this is that this is a very forward-looking webinar. We are going to be talking about what may be happening, what could happen, what we see happening or starting. And so unlike other webinars that GALA hosts regularly, where people are talking about how they implemented something or how they achieved something, and they're looking back in great detail over how they achieved it, we're going to be looking towards the future. And so I would encourage you to think differently, open your minds about how this new technology, how AI could affect your operations. So having said that, let me move on to the next slide here. I can get everything functioning the way it's supposed to. There we go. In attendance today, I will say that we had at least 22 different countries, people from 22 different countries attending. And in addition, we have a lot of folks from large corporations, also language service companies, small and large, as well as some individual practitioners. And so with that being the case, we have a very broad swath of the language services community here. And that's a wonderful thing. It means the diversity is going to be really interesting, and we look forward to your questions. You've already had an introduction of myself and Katharine, but Katharine, just if you want to jump in and say hello here quickly.
Hi, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I think just to add to our introductions, I think what I'd like to say is that we are also the team that brings the Think Interpreting track to the GALA annual conference. And really that may be the most relevant part of our bios here. And because what we do is try to monitor and digest and analyze major trends in the interpreting market as a whole. And so this is a little bit of a teaser for us. We're really excited about the artificial intelligence topics that are going to be at the conference. So just wanted to bring that tie in. And I think next slide, Barry. So we're going to start off just by giving you a basic definition of artificial intelligence, only so that we can all be on the same page with what we're talking about today. This is the Google definition of artificial intelligence. You can see what it says on the slide, and really basically in short terms, it means the ability of a computer program or a machine to think and learn. And what we really want to cover today is how we think that's going to be impacting our profession. Go ahead, Barry. And so this is basically what we will hope to cover in today's webinar. Barry's going to start us off with a philosophical debate about artificial intelligence to try and frame the rest of the discussion. We want to get into some of the definitions of the new technologies that are coming in that are being driven or increasingly impacted by artificial intelligence. Then we want to look at the market itself and have some thought about where we may go from here. And with that, I hand it off to Barry.
All right, thanks, Katharine. So I don't want your eyes to glaze over and say, a philosophical debate. What are we doing with a philosophical debate in a GALA webinar? Trust me, it will make sense. So I have been actually quite involved in researching and understanding artificial intelligence and its possibility for affecting the language services industry for some time, particularly interpreting. And I've done a lot of reading over the last few years. I tallied it up, and I think I've read probably 12 books in the last couple of years, all on artificial intelligence. One of the things about the books is I've read artificial intelligence books that focus on artificial intelligence in the economy, artificial intelligence and education, artificial intelligence and jobs, artificial intelligence and X, right? And one of the things that troubled me about all of these books is that they seem to have running through them this thread of inevitability, that regardless of what we do, artificial intelligence will surpass human intelligence. It's just a done deal. It will happen. And I thought, the more I know about language and my understanding of language and the language professions, I just said, something is not clicking here. They're missing something. And they would always bring up, and usually in a very cursory way, refer to, oh, and by the way, AI can translate languages. Full stop, right? And that really didn't cover everything for me. So I recently came across a book called The Fourth Age, Smart Robots, Conscious Computers, and the Future of Humanity by Byron Reese. I highly recommend it because he finally deconstructed this whole situation and was able to put it into terms where I said, yes, this is it. And it's basically that there is this philosophical debate between what I'm going to call monists and dualists. Those of you who have been in philosophy will understand this, but monists, basically for the purposes of AI and creating technology that can learn, monists believe that humans are a machine and that everything about our experience is physical and it can be explained, and that we are very complex machines, biological machines, but at the end of the day, we are machines. And therefore, if something is possible, if it can be built, then it will be built. And so for a monist, for someone who is in the AI field, it is going to happen, end of story. Now, the nice thing is that Reese brought in the other idea of the dualists, and that is that they say, now, computers and living creatures are two very different things, and that the idea of a living machine is a contradiction in terms, right? So it is this idea that there is physical, but there is also something that ideas are not going to be ruled or governed by existing understanding of the physical world. So I don't want to get too much more into this debate, but understand that at the end of the day, anybody who's writing about artificial intelligence is going to fall into one of these two camps. And I think most of what I've seen, those that are developing AI and those that are writing about it tend to be monists. They tend to think that we are machines and that's all there is to it. The physical world will define everything, and therefore we will get to the point where computers will have intelligence, that general intelligence, artificial intelligence that often is referred to in the movies. Dualists believe, no, there's something about the human experience, call it whatever you will, but not everything is going to be governed by these rules for the physical world. So understanding that, I really believe that I am a dualist in the first place, and that is that language and the human experience, currently the technology cannot address it 100%, and I don't see that necessarily happening. I don't know about if ever, but at any rate. So moving on, we're going to get to a couple of other definitions that are going to be important for us to understand, and I'm going to hand that off to Katharine.
Thank you, Barry. Yeah, so everybody, I'm sure, is thinking about, well, am I a monist or am I a dualist? And it is a huge issue for our field because, you know, do we believe that language is something so intrinsically inherent to the human consciousness, you know, that it is not ultimately replicable, or is it replicable? I think that is the big debate that's happening. But let's just move on to some basic definitions so we, you know, again, all stay on the same page and we're not making assumptions about, you know, shared knowledge. I think we all have a handle on what interpreting is, but here are a couple of definitions just so we understand we're speaking about spoken and signed language, and we are not talking, for the purposes of this webinar, about translation or written translation. And then the next idea that we want to sort of be sure that we have all seen before is this idea of human parity. And basically, human parity currently is defined as when a machine produces something of equivalent quality that a human being produces. So when a machine gets to the point where they can produce something as well as or even better than a human, then that's called human parity. So these two definitions here that you're seeing were provided by Microsoft when they announced that we have achieved human parity with Chinese English machine translation. However, and go ahead, Barry, you can move on. There's actually, this is problematic, right? So the real issue here is, how do you define equivalent quality? So, you know, current research standards put this at the sentence level. You know, raters are seeing single sentences one by one, and then and if they see them sort of roughly being equivalent to what a human produces, then they say, okay, great, we've got human parity. But in reality, how we're defining equivalent quality is very random, you know, and we do have agreement, I think, on the machine translation level that we need to move from the sentence level, at least to the document level, to be able to actually capture the meaning of what a document is saying. And this is even more true when you're talking about trying to capture the meaning of spoken speech with all the nuance that comes in. So what we really want to get at here is human parity in the discussion with the artificial intelligence, as well as in the discussion of how it applies to interpreting. It's a really problematic term that means different things to different people. It's not a precise term.
Yeah, and I would just simply add that it is not only it's not precise, it's woefully deficient, problematic. And when the general public hears the term human parity, they immediately are thinking, oh, the machine's just like a human, right? The image that conjures up is one that this industry has to deal with, because that has a direct influence on client expectations on a regular basis. And so human parity is something that we have to watch closely, because it is misunderstood, I think, more than it is understood. So last thing, speech-to-speech translation. Sorry, Katharine, did I cut you off? Was there one other thing you wanted to say?
Nope, thanks for that, and now it's over to you.
Okay, super. So speech-to-speech translation. The goal is basically allowing two people to communicate, right, interpersonally, when natural spoken language, when they don't share that common language, using some form of technology or AI, right? And I want us to understand this whole process here. And machine translation, and this is where as AI continues to make its way into the language services space, it is going to continue to have at the vanguard written translation. The reason being that if you look at any of the technologies that are being employed for any kind of speech-to-speech translation, note I have not said machine interpreting, but speech-to-speech translation, because there is no machine interpreting in the sense of language to language interpreting as humans do. Why is that? Well, first off, you have machine translation, which is right in the center of this process. And with speech-to-speech translation, what we've done is we've tacked on other layers or other steps in the process that make this more of a challenge, right? So we have to start with speech recognition, which has improved by leaps and bounds in recent years, and it's amazing. I use speech recognition on a daily basis, but it is still far from perfect. And so you introduce an additional failure point to the chain. When you go from speech to text, you can introduce other failure points, right? Homophones, misspellings, misunderstandings that will then be fed into the machine translation, where those failures can actually be compounded. Same thing can happen when it comes into text production, and then finally into speech synthesis, right? Where there's an other possibility for misunderstanding, and also, is someone going to be willing to listen to this for long periods of time? Now, these are just some of the issues as this comes together, and I'm not showing this because I say, oh no, this isn't useful. It is useful, and I think its usefulness will grow and actually quite quickly. But we shouldn't kid ourselves about the complexities that speech-to-speech translation adds to the process of moving text from one language to another, which is the core of the process, right? So we're really just adding on for the spoken element of real-time translation and speech-to-speech translation. Interestingly enough, there was Slater reported on this recently. CES takes place every January, and it has become the place where many of the different speech-to-speech translation companies have been going, which with their devices to show what they're able to achieve. And Google announced interpretation mode. There were some other upgrades from some other companies as well, but largely, as Slater indicated, nothing groundbreakingly new, because there really hasn't been. There's just adjustments really in the user experience as they're trying to improve that. And I'll go back just for 1 second to this slide, because that really is the issue here. There are going to be continued tweaks to improve user experience, and we're going to see this used much more as it becomes much easier for the end user to make use of speech-to-speech translation. But we're not there yet. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at AI's impact on the interpreting market here quickly. There's a quote here at the bottom from Kevin Kelly at Wired Magazine, and I think that this is something that we need to keep in mind within our profession, because, and in this area, because there are a lot of incumbents that have been around for quite some time. And basically, as he says, the business plans of the next 10,000 startups are easy to forecast. It's take X and add AI. We are going to see in this era of implementation a lot more startup companies that are figuring out ways to apply AI to what we do. And when you have a lot of companies that are doing this, many are going to fail, but there are those that will not. But AI is going to be used. Okay, so unfortunately, when we talk about this in the interpreting space, in the language services space, it far too often gets couched in the argument of, oh, I'm going to be replaced by technology, my job's going to be gone. And this kind of a dichotomy really is not that helpful. It's not black and white. It's not going to be it replaces me or it doesn't. The reality is much more nuanced. And so let's take a look at where AI is actually being implemented now. So some of you, if you've been to my presentations before, you've seen another iteration of this table, but it really does apply. Because they're basically, AI is affecting translation and interpreting in, I think, 4 areas or 4 fields. First, it can change and expand service delivery, and we're going to look at examples of each of these shortly. Then it can improve translator and interpreter performance. This is an area where, for individual practitioners, we're trying to figure out, how do I implement this so that I can actually become not only more productive, but also improve my performance? And this is something that agencies should be looking at as well, because it will have a positive effect on their operations if the linguists that they hire can increase their performance through AI. Then AI, in some instances, could replace human translators and interpreters altogether, or more accurately say, at this stage, go into areas where it is not economically or logistically feasible for interpreters to offer services, human interpreters. And then finally, workflow management is being improved very rapidly through AI. So with that, I'll hand it over to Katharine.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about that first example, which is, how can AI be improving or changing or expanding service delivery? And so many of you may know that I come out of the healthcare field and the interpreting and sort of the whole big community interpreting part of our profession. And so one of the issues is, how can you actually have real language access for people who are in need of service or in hospitals receiving service? And a really good example of how AI, where we could apply machine translation and speech-to-speech translation for a whole bunch of kinds of interactions that you'll never have an interpreter present for, and there aren't enough trained human interpreters in existence anyway, even now, it would be by the patient bedside. So take the inpatient person who's been admitted to the hospital, is going to stay there for however long. They're there 24/7, and they're in a world where they don't have access to the language around them. And so, and they don't have access even to a lot of basic needs. So one increasing trend in hospitals for all patients, English-speaking patients included, is to put iPads by the bedside table and to have these kinds of interfaces that you see in this picture, where the patient has a little more control and autonomy of saying, help, I need help, or I'm hungry, or I need assistance going to the bathroom, or something's going on. And this is the kind of area where that's very concrete, direct communication and information where you can embed translation apps into this and really expand access for non-English speaking patients in an area and an arena where there aren't interpreters currently, and there probably never will be, because there just aren't enough of them for all of those kinds of interactions. So this is an example where it can really expand our field and, and free up the human interpreters to focus on the more important, complex medical interactions. And that's the first example, and Barry's going to take over the next two.
Yeah, so the next example I'd like to talk to you about is helping individual linguists, right? We are starting to see the use of speech recognition to help interpreters. So in the source language, the speech recognition can pull up numbers and proper names. And also when that's coupled with existing corpora or with glossaries, it can also suggest terminology to the interpreter almost in real time. And this allows the interpreter to have a screen in front of them where they will see the numbers that have been said, or the proper names, or the terminology, and that can help them. Additionally, before assignments, if they're receiving large amounts of data and they need to prepare for a conference, they can actually use AI for terminology extraction. This is different from the terminology extraction that you think about for translation. This is pulling things out of documents that are received and dropping them into an interface that is much more interpreter friendly, that allows for a much quicker search. The typeface is larger, and it allows them to create those glossaries for specific assignments in a way that in the past it just was not really feasible. So those are just some of the examples we're seeing on improving individual interpreter performance. Now, speech-to-speech translation, which I've referred to a little bit previously, is an area where I see the greatest opportunity for expansion in our space when it comes to the use of AI. I have had the opportunity to see multiple platforms and multiple presentations, and some that hang on your ear, some that are based on the cell phone, some that are platform agnostic and can interact regardless of what kind of platform you're using, whether it's a handheld or a tablet or a computer. The possibility of embedding this kind of speech-to-speech translation technology within other services. For example, if you take an app that is providing a service that is being used all over the world, for example, ride-sharing apps, the ability to drop speech-to-speech translation into an app like that, where a service provider may not speak the language of the person who needs the service, and they just need to have rudimentary communication. Hello, I'm at door 5 of the airport, or something along those lines, or I've crossed the street. These are things that normally can be interpreted well, or be translated well in this format, and can provide real communication value. And so I see an interesting opportunity for folding these kinds of technologies into existing service apps, so that you can have these kinds of communication that are needed, say with a taxi driver or with someone else. Now, doesn't mean that it's going to be completely error-free, but nevertheless, it can provide communication value. And so I'm really excited just to mention that at Think Interpreting in Munich, we are going to have a CEO from TranslateLive.com, Peter Hayes, who is very well versed currently in the state-of-the-art technology for speech-to-speech translation. And he's going to be talking about live conversational machine translation, what it can do, what it can't, what the foundation of it is. And so I encourage you to join us in Munich to learn more about this. Also, if I can just quickly point you to the Tech Savvy Interpreter, if you're interested in seeing any of this technology actually working, I have done one review, and I'm also writing in the Tech Savvy Interpreter column that's published in the Toolbox Journal each month. I've written on a number of different platforms that are providing these kinds of services, among other technologies. So there's more out there if you just look for it. But this is one to watch, and one that you should be asking, how could this disrupt what we do, or how could we get involved in this space? And I think I've got the next one is no, Katharine, I think this one's yours.
Yeah, I think I'm taking over for a little bit. So if we remember, we're sort of going through these, 4 different examples of where AI is impacting. And the last one was, sort of this area of replacing human translators and interpreters altogether. And then the last one, the 4th one, is improved workflow management. And I'd say that this example here that we're using of, when you have artificial intelligence that can be used to match linguists and assignments, can both improve workflow management, and is an example that is likely to replace current job descriptions for project managers. So I think many of you, I'm sure, are very aware of how many interpreter management systems, or IMSs, are coming on, and how many different startups we've had in the field that are trying to get these full-on databases where the interpreters and the companies and the scheduling software and the billing and invoicing software is all there in one piece. But those softwares up until recently really have still required a project manager to be in direct contact with an interpreter or a linguist, to match them with their assignments. And we're getting to the point now with these newest platforms where that job role is being replaced, through artificial intelligence, where the software itself can just match, the correct interpreter or linguist without anybody having to be in the middle of it. And so this is another example, I think, that's very relevant depending on what your company does. If you are in the business of, trying to provide interpreting services and translation services, these platforms are being increasingly driven by AI, and they are going to change job descriptions and eliminate. They're both going to enhance service and improve workflow management, but they're also going to change how people work inside agencies. So it's just another example of how this is already here in some ways, and it's something to be paying attention to now. So that kind of wraps up our examples of how it's impacting in general. And so I think now the next question is, where do we go from here? And we've got, I might let you speak to this quote for a minute, Barry, and then I'll jump back in so that.
Okay. Now, just this quote by Nicholas Carr, it's actually a few years old, but I think it really is what helped me understand how technology and AI were going to be able to disrupt the way interpreting services were provided, because when they have no physical form and when they can be delivered as digital services over a network, the constraints disappear. So we have the opportunity to really expand access. And this has a lot to do with remote interpreting, which we've talked about on a number of occasions. but AI really is going to be built on top of the remote part as well. And we're going to see that there's going to be increased competition. There is already increased competition because things are flattening out. And linguists are beginning to provide services at a distance on a fairly regular basis. And so the next step is, when does AI step in to do this as well?
Right. And so I think we're, Barry and I have been talking about disruption and change. And, we are all, I think, probably sick of the idea of huge disruptive technologies that are coming in. But whether we're sick of it or not, it's still the reality. So here we have a, quote from the founder and chairman of the World Economic Forum, who's saying that change is not going to come in waves like, this time in the past. It's coming as a tsunami. And I would argue that we're already kind of have been in this tsunami of change for quite a while. But that means that none of us have a choice but to actually have this ability and bring a lot of entrepreneurship on a regular basis to the work we're doing. It's not kind of like in the old days where you say, oh, I've got this startup and this great new idea and I'm going to establish the business. And then that business model is going to stay stable, for 20 years. Actually we get an idea, establish the business, have a model that we're working off of with the expectation that 5 years from now, 3 years from now, we're actually already going to have to be making significant changes to the model of the service delivery. So as you can see, it's not the big fish that eats the small fish, it's the fast one that eats the slow one. And I think we are all living this in many ways, both personally and through our business realities. So the next slide, I think, is just to reiterate this idea and to really give ourselves some compassion, for the fatigue we may be feeling. If you are, depending on, no matter what your age is, you are old enough to have lived through at least probably 3 of these huge tsunami waves, starting with the advent of the personal computer, and then when you linked that to the internet and linked the entire world to personal computing power, from the home or home office. And then in the last just 15 years, we've had this absolute tsunami of the impact that mobile technology has had, especially on the interpreting profession. I mean, with the advent of the internet, that flipped the translation profession, almost on its head, because it just changed all the models for how services were being delivered. Interpreting was a little bit slower for that to happen, but as soon as mobile technology came, it's really flipped the way the interpreting services are being delivered and the expectations of how they're going to be delivered. And now everything has moved to the cloud. So we are increasingly, as the quote says in the beginning, we're not even needing any kind of brick and mortar. Less and less do we need anything other than some kind of computer and software for us to be able to provide very complex and nuanced services. So Barry, if you click on the AI, you'll see, or if you just do one more click on the slide, you'll see what we sort of see as the next tsunami coming. AI is really going to be what we're dealing with again. So we may be tired of this constant change, but we're in it, and this is the next one. And I just feel like we just got through the conversation of, hey, everybody, remote is coming, it's going to be a big change. And we haven't even really finished that conversation, and now we're here, having to deal with AI. So we can move on, and you'll see AI is definitely taking more precedence now. So when we think about this, one of the things that we're seeing with all of these different, huge changes in technological advancement is that we have a convergence coming. And this is really a force to be reckoned with. I think many of us may be experiencing app fatigue. We're less and less willing to have multiple services and multiple platforms and multiple sign-ins, and more, people want to have workflows where you can just have one platform that's going to let us do everything in one place or in as few places as possible as it integrates more and more. So workflows are being digitalized and automated through artificial intelligence, and we're seeing a slow convergence of voice, video, and collaboration platforms. And so one of the big things that's happening with that expectation, and go ahead, Barry, you can move forward, is that we're that maybe hitting all of you already right now is this change in client expectations, right? So because people have that fatigue, and because we have this wish for everything to converge just into a simpler, I want it right now, immediate, service delivery, that's what your clients want, and they hear all these great projects, all these great pronouncements that, oh, now we have, automatic interpreting, speech to speech translation. We don't have to use people as much, and they want you to give that to them, but that's not where we are at yet. So you've got a lot of client expectations that are overblown or wrong, and one of the challenges for all of us in the field is how can we respond to this. So as we move through this, we're going to let Barry sort of bring it home, and we're going to look at some of the ways that we can, look towards the future and try and be ready and not get caught flat-footed with these changes.
Yeah. So in this, I would just hark back to remote interpreting when it was starting to be introduced. What did you do? How did you respond? Did you decide to white label a service for telephonic or for video? Did you decide to partner with another ISP, an interpreting service provider, and you just focused on translation? What was your approach and what worked? Because I think what you did when addressing remote is going to help you determine how you need to respond to AI as it continues to advance. Okay. From the examples that we've given, you'll notice that if of those four, the one that has the most concrete and now is being able to use AI to improve workflows and being able to automate much of what took a lot of labor in the past. And so that is happening now, and that's why you're seeing so many folks trying to adjust to be able to staff without having to take hours and hours. So in that area, if you haven't started to automate your, not only business processes, but also all of the administrative processes associated with providing the interpreting services, I would start to look at that now, because it is going to be a differentiating factor, and it will end up having an effect on margins and price points as it continues to move forward, and you're able to bring down that overhead associated with it. The other areas, particularly speech-to-speech translation, that's a little bit more on the frontier, and looking at how you might be able to use some of that and how you could use it. Whoever is able to unlock that and be able to apply it at the appropriate place, the appropriate time, and at the appropriate level has the potential to do some pretty amazing business. But we're still very much at that stage where spaghetti is being thrown at the wall and some of it is sticking. So keep an eye on that space significantly, because that is an area where it's going to be important. If you can support your interpreters with providing technology solutions so that they are more productive and more successful, frankly, in their assignments and in prepping, then that's going to be really good. I can think of a number of companies that are starting to leverage the technology to be able to help the interpreters have access to what they need when they're dealing with very specific assignments that have to do with a great deal of terminology and specificity. And they're leveraging technology and making it available in that way. Also, educating your clients is going to be a big deal. Their expectations are at a point based on the general media consumption that they're going to come and ask for things that simply aren't possible. But based on what they've read, it is, right? And so how do you educate them without having everything seem like a letdown is another thing that needs to be kept in mind. So let me move on to our next thing, and the whole idea of being proactive, right? We need to be much more proactive in our space, determining where the unique skills of the human interpreters need to be targeted and preserved, and where can AI create the greatest efficiencies and expand access. Being able to use AI for a paid service can be extremely attractive, but you have to find out where that's going to fit. And it's going to be the companies that are on the vanguard of this that are going to see, I think, the greatest movement and success initially. So ask yourself, are you someone on that vanguard? Are you going to be a fast follower? or are you going to hang back and not begin to convert until you absolutely have to? Just to say here again, and this is from Kai-Fu Lee's book. Some of you may have seen him on 60 Minutes this Sunday. He is known as the statesman or the guru of AI, very knowledgeable, but I think he really nailed it when he said that this is the age of implementation. The technology is good enough for a lot of applications now. AI is making significant changes to the way the world works. And there are lots of implementers in China, in the United States, in Europe. They are figuring out ways to implement this, and we are going to see disruption in our space. And we need to be, prepared for that as best we can. And I think I turn it over to, no, it's still me. So one of the ways of doing that is you diversify your delivery models. You don't just stick with a red apple or a green apple. You figure out how you can do both. And we're going to see a diversification of the remuneration models as well. That is a simple fact. This is a huge pain point right now within the interpreting community, because old models are not necessarily fitting for these new ways of delivering or providing a service. And so we have to figure out how we're going to do that. So you should give great attention to it and not think that all of the old remuneration models are going to be able to function in this new world. And working conditions are going to change. And you're going to have to figure out, how do I reassign? If I'm going to keep someone on staff, they're not going to have to be doing what they used to. How do I adjust that? So that really is what we wanted to share with you today. We hope you found it interesting and of usefulness. So if you'd like to reach out to us, feel free. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and it's been a pleasure. And we are open, I think, for the next 7 to 10 minutes for questions.
I just wanted, right before we go into the questions, just a final comment to wrap up as well, is to say that we've all lived through this sort of negative reaction to change, but that really hit hard with the translation shift, and how much translators and people resisted the advent of cat tools, and we were dragged kicking and screaming. And it is my hope that we are not going to relive that with every new technology change, that we can instead be proactive and look forward and say, hey, let's really figure out our entire skill set, whether it's technological or human, and let's really value both and find a way to increase access and provide service diversification in a really positive way. That would be my final statement. And thank you. So go ahead, Manuela, with the question.
No, thank you, both of you. So for our audience, we're open for questions. So feel free to type them into your chat box, and I will relate them to Kathy and Barry. So thank you both for this really interesting synthesis, and also for that outlook on where the translation industry is going, but more specifically where the field of interpretation is going. Towards the end of your presentation, you mentioned where should unique skills of human interpreters be targeted and preserved, and I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about where you think, or what do you think the new skills are that interpreters as human beings need to build, not in order to compete with new AI-based solutions, but to peacefully coexist with them. Where should they invest? What should they watch out for?
Well, I'll go ahead and take that one.
Yeah,
I'll go ahead and go first. Yeah. And simply say, with this, what interpreters need to be doing is having a very clear idea of what differentiates them from the AI offerings that are coming. And that means that they need to accentuate their humanness. Mm-hmm. We're dealing with narrow, specific artificial intelligence that can be very good at one task. Humans, and if you listen or have to work with speech-to-speech translation, it's only good for very short utterances, for simple things. And what people want when they go to conferences, when they interact, when they speak with other people, is they want connection, they want interaction, they want to know that they're being listened to. And so I really think that for interpreters that are looking to be successful, and companies that are looking to highlight what it is that makes them different from the technology that's out there, it really is going to be that humanness, that human quality in the service that is provided, that high touch. is going to be more important than ever for differentiation. Anything else to add, Katharine?
Yeah, I just say that this does play out differently across the different sectors of the interpreting market. You know, you have one sector of the market in the sort of diplomatic and business world where you may have interpreters that are actually trained very well to their full skill set. And so that's a great group of interpreters that really can, you know, just come in and say, listen, I've got a nuanced skill set that only I can provide. We don't want a machine interpreting between presidents, for example. And that the way that plays out, and to answer Manuela's question, in like say the medical or the educational or social service market, I would say we need to back up a little bit and just really help interpreters actually first, you know, continue to acquire the full skill set, the full interpreting skill set, which many do not yet because there's just not enough education pathways. So you've got a lot of interpreters working in very complex settings that really require the human touch. You know, you don't want probably even remote interpreting embedded too much when you have a child sick with cancer who has repeated contacts with the same doctors and team. Way better to get a team of interpreters in who are consistent and really acquire the expertise for that kind of really high stress, high stakes interaction. And so I think that's another area where really just also providing more resources and targeting and helping your interpreter base build those skill sets so that they can really bring that human touch to those high stress and high
stakes scenarios.
Points.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you both. That's a really good answer. Much food for thought here. We have one question here by an audience member who would like to know who or what companies are actually developing the AI technology that you talked about. I wonder if you could name a few. If it's a contentious question, then let's not go there. But
no, and that's not contentious at all. I think one thing you have to understand is that all the big companies are. And most of the solutions that are being built for AI, for speech-to-speech, they're going to be built on one of the big platforms. Big platforms being Google, Amazon, Baidu, Tencent, others. Any large, Microsoft, of course, any large company that is in this space is working on artificial intelligence, and part of that strategy includes language translation. Because they want to be able to empower cross-border transactions and to make things so that the world is one frictionless market as much as possible. And so you then have another layer of entrepreneurs and designers and programmers who come in and then are going to build on top of the AI platforms or the machine translation platforms of these larger companies to offer the service. You know, IBM is also very much involved. I've reviewed different technologies that are based on either on IBM Watson or Google Translate or Microsoft Translate. I think it's called Translate Live. I can't remember. Forgive me if I don't get the name right. And Baidu has theirs as well. You know, all of the big Chinese companies do, and they're figuring out how it is that they can use this, and they can then embed it into other technologies. Let me say one thing quickly about the concern that we all have, and that is data privacy and security, right? Often there have been all sorts of news articles about people dropping sensitive documents into Google Translate to get the translation, and then Google gleans that and drops it into the database, right? And that's problematic. The legal ins and outs of that are going to get worked out. We shouldn't think that just because something's in the cloud that, no, we can't touch it. There will be legal instruments set up to ensure that, and they can guard and wall the data of specific clients that are using their technology to be able to do speech-to-speech translation or just simple MT, and that is going to be resolved. And so we shouldn't think that just because we've seen problems early on that raise ethical questions, that those can't be resolved. They are being resolved.
Thank you for that. We have a few more questions. I will relate those to you after the webinar. We do need to call it quits a little early. Barry is in high demand at the moment and has another press interview lined up, and so he needs to get going. So whatever questions remain, I will send them on to you. Maybe you have the time to actually respond to them. Thank you both. This was a very interesting webinar. I really enjoyed listening to your thoughts and your ideas. And another really big thank you to all of our participants for joining us today. We would really appreciate it if you could take just a moment to give us your feedback on today's session using the post-event survey. It is short, but your perspectives help us to continue to refine our webinar program. And with that, I wish you all a good day or good night, depending on where you are, and I look forward to seeing you at another GALA webinar soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.